Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hello Monday Office Hours. I'm the producer of Hello Monday, Sarah Storm. I'm here with Michaela Greer, our contributor, and today we're sponsored by Accenture. Thanks, Accenture, for joining us. How you doing, Michaela?
Doing so well. How are you doing?
I'm having a lovely day. It's so much brighter out. Yesterday was just rain everywhere. Let's see who's with us today. We've got Dolores. We've got Simon, Ryan, Justine, Sri Krishna. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Willie, good to have you here. Viana, I see you there. Anna Zita, nice to have you with us. Today, we have a treat for you today. So the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about a couple of different things during our episodes. One is how to have a good day at a bad job. And the other is this trend that we're seeing, the great resignation or the great reshuffling. Yeah.
I think if you've been on LinkedIn in the past few weeks, you've probably seen our storylines. This has been a hot topic, and I'm so glad that we're talking about it. And I'm glad that we have someone joining us today who is an expert on it.
Absolutely. We are joined today by Andrew Seaman, who hosts LinkedIn's Get Hired Fridays right here on LinkedIn News Live. I'm going to head to the chat. You guys have a great conversation.
Bye, Sarah. Okay, now that she's gone, let's get started.
Now we can really have fun. So Andrew, thank you for joining us, of course, today. We're so excited to have you. And in talking about the Great Resignation, I'm sure that you've heard about this a lot, but I was really wondering, when do you know when it's the right time to leave your job? We've been talking about leaving, but how do you know when it's time to leave?
So I think that's a personal decision for everyone. We asked people basically what their suggestions were for people who maybe they were contemplating, should I leave my job? Should I move to a new play? In LinkedIn, we call it our next play, as when we move to our next job. And, it really comes down to what you are doing and what your personal goals are. So I know for some people, they basically wrote that they want to move on when they feel like they've learned all they could in a role, or when they feel bored. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I remember a mentor of mine, she once told me that, she knew it was time to move on when she felt that she was too comfortable. And, that meant that she was doing the same thing every day and she needed to sort of move on to her next challenge. And then there are some people who they don't want to do the work they're doing anymore. And that's a completely valid thing. We've come through this really intense time where people were forced to re-examine what they do every day. They wake up, they do it in their living room, or they're risking their lives to do it. And they're just being forced to say, do I really want to do this? So it really comes down to a question that everyone's asking. And I feel like if someone is thinking about moving to a new job or quitting their current one, I think that is something that they're going to know intrinsically. There's just going to be something in them that's nagging. And, when we talk about the Great Resignation, and I call it the big shift, and I think, Ryan in a video yesterday called it the Great Shuffle. I think, it comes down to looking for what you want to do next. The Great Resignation, I think the term is interesting, but it's a little bit misplaced, because the Great Resignation is a luxury for a lot of people. There's not many people in the world, in the country, who can say, I give up, I'm just going to take some time off. So, that's not the reality for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's just looking for what's next.
And so if you're joining us and you haven't had a chance to listen to the episode, it's about the Great Resignation, which is a term that Andrew Klutz kind of coined. Jesse was able to interview him, as well as play a few snippets from everyone who listens. And one of the common themes was that people had all of this time to think, as you were just mentioning, Andrew, all of this time to think about whether or not they really want to stay at this job, whether or not it was fulfilling for them. And that was a common thread. I'm curious to know how people are feeling today about their jobs. It's a Wednesday, it's hump day. Would love to see you drop a quick emoji in the chat to say how you're feeling today. How are you feeling today, Andrew?
I'm doing pretty good. I got out a little bit, and it's not that humid in New York City. The weather is beautiful. It's sunny, so I can't really complain.
Yes.
And how about you?
Today has been a great day. It is sunny where I am. I'm up in Yonkers, so love seeing the Palisades. I'm seeing a lot of emojis come through, and a question on when your show is on, Andrew. So I definitely want to have you answer that, because it's a great one and we don't want anyone to miss that.
Yeah, so I do a show every Friday called Get Hired Live, and that's at noon. And I lied, it's not every Friday. We're actually taking this week off, so I'll be back next week, right before the holiday. And we talk about careers, job searching, and I usually have a guest on to answer your questions. They're career experts. There's HR executives that come on. So really about, how to make your next play, what to do. We've had psychologists on there, authors who basically show you how to hack your time management skills, things like that. So Fridays at noon Eastern time. You can find it on the LinkedIn news page, and you could also find the information in my weekly newsletter, Get Hired.
Yes. And on the next play, can we talk a little bit about when you're getting ready to leave, how do you make sure you leave on good terms, and why is that important?
Well, it's always important to leave on good terms because you have such a strong network usually from your previous job. That's not true for everyone. A lot of people want to leave their job because they don't like the people they work with. That is a valid reason to leave a job. If you're surrounded by people you don't like every day, it's not going to be a great time for you. But if you do like the people that you work with, if they've seen your work, if they've seen you're a good worker, then you want them to be able to vouch for you in the future. So you don't want to burn those bridges. Now, how you leave a job really depends on the circumstances. When I actually came to LinkedIn, I had to give less than 2 weeks notice because of how LinkedIn structured their sort of welcoming program and their orientation. And luckily, my previous employer was very cool with it. They understood that it was a great opportunity for me to come here. So you really need to have those discussions, and it depends on your personal circumstances in the office or the workplace where you are. Don't do anything until you have signed an offer letter with a prospective employer, because I think a lot of people, they fall in love with jobs before they actually get them, and they're sort of like, I am out the door, I am the best candidate, and anything could happen. Their cousin could suddenly want a job, and all of a sudden you're the next best candidate, so you may not get that job. So never sort of start opening the door until you've actually signed an offer letter. And then make sure you talk to your manager, ask, have that conversation with them. They may want to counter, they may not want to counter. And that's a conversation that they're going to be having really right now with a lot of people, because of this weird labor and job market. There's going to be a lot of people that go to them and say, hey, I think I want to move to this other company. And the employer and your managers are really going to have to talk and say, okay, well, maybe I'm going to offer you some more money. Can I compete with that offer? Things like that. And then once that's done, you want to help make the transition as easy as possible. Maybe you can talk to your future employer and say, hey, can I have an extra week to help out my previous employer, train the new person? It's really up to you how grateful you or gracious you want to leave a position. And there is another side to it, because there needs to be some grace on the other side of the equation too. There are some times where people will leave a job and a employer or a manager may say, well, who needs you? That sort of energy. Hopefully that's the minority of circumstances, right. But you can't sort of discount that completely. So you need to be prepared for all circumstances. And then some companies, they do have a culture of letting people go as soon as they let them know that they've accepted another job, especially if it's at a competitor. So it's important to know what they do historically with other people when they leave jobs. And you could ask around and say, hey, what happened when Bob left? Was it a good thing? What happened to him? So there's a few things you could do, sort of do your homework, but also don't show your cards until you know that you're actually going to be leaving.
And you mentioned something that I think would be interesting for a lot of us. In the talk of the Great Resignation, we've also been seeing the great rival offer. So how do I, especially if I want to stay at my company, but I just want a better offer, how do I use an offer that I got to get a better counter offer at my company?
That is a very good question. And the experts that I've talked to about this over the years have all universally said the same thing. If you do that, be prepared to leave. If you do go to a boss and say, hey, I have this great offer from our competitor or another company, and your current employer says, great, that's fantastic for you, best of luck, you have to be prepared to take that other offer. So until you get an offer, like I said, don't try and play that card. And also be realistic. There are just some companies that can't compete with others. there are some situations where they can say, listen, we are not in a position to do that. We really value you and appreciate you, but that's all we can really do for you right now. So you have to be prepared to leave. But it's important to have those conversations with your boss, especially if you don't want to leave that workplace. Maybe a new position comes to you or a new offer comes to you with a big bag of money, and you say, this is fantastic, but I actually kind of like my current job. That's okay. And you can go to your boss and say, listen, I have this offer from another company. I like my job. I don't necessarily want to leave, but this is an opportunity that I can't pass up. And you can start that conversation and see where it goes. And even if you don't accept that offer, maybe you want to stay in your current job, but it's something that you have to sort of weigh for yourself, but also just be smart about how you engage with your employer. And like I said, you have to be prepared to leave if you're going to play that card.
So it seems like a balancing act. And you mentioned earlier that you really don't want to kind of play your hand until maybe you have that offer, and for good reason. So if I am trying to renegotiate something, I don't want to let them know that maybe I'm looking for something too early, but I also don't want to wait too late to try and get that counter offer. What would you say, based on the experts that you have been speaking to, what do they recommend? What is the sweet spot?
It's really for your safety that you need to wait until you have an offer, which is usually why when you do get an offer, you want to ask for several days to contemplate it. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes you could be open with a future employer and say, listen, I need to sort of discuss with my current employer. I need to leave on good terms. And recruiters, they are obviously well-versed in how this goes. If you're dealing with a recruiter, they know this is sort of a back and forth. So usually they'll give you several days to talk to your current employer and work that out. So, it's good to talk to some people and explain what the process is for you, what you're going through, maybe coworkers who can give you some insight into what's happening at the company. Maybe they've heard things about budgets or something like that. But when it comes to that formal negotiation, it's the offer letter is your insurance policy, because otherwise, like I said, you can go in there and if you say, hey, I have this offer from this other company, and they say, hey, that's great, go with them. It's awkward for you on the other end of that, and possibly troubling, especially if you don't have that offer, because like I said, something can happen last minute. So even though it doesn't give you a ton of time, you need to protect yourself more than anything.
Thanks. And if you're just joining us and talking with Andrew Seaman here, he is a news editor and he runs an awesome newsletter and show on Fridays called Get Hired. And he really helps job seekers get jobs. So I would love, if you have any questions, please drop them in the stream and we'll try to get them up here. I also would love to ask you, Andrew, though, about job hopping. I am new to corporate America, fresh out of school. And I'm hearing a lot, my friends saying, I've had this year, I've only really been at my company for a year. I don't know if it is the right time to kind of leave. I feel like it is, but would it look bad if I keep job hopping? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
That is a great question. And please never leave us, Michaela, because you are sort of the brains of the operation around here. For those of you watching, Michaela has about 1,000 Post-it notes that she's looking at right now. And that is the collective knowledge of the entire LinkedIn editorial team. So Michaela, you are too valuable to leave us. Please never do.
Really thinking the brain over here, but thank you.
But basically, it really comes down to your profession. There are some places where maybe it's frowned upon in your profession still, but for most industries, job hopping is something that's actually quite common right now. Mm-hmm. I remember my last employer, I was there for 7 years, and I had a lot of friends in the media industry who was basically, they were going from one job to another every 1 or 2 years. And I started getting a complex thinking, I'm like, is there something wrong with me? And it was just one of those things where, my parents, they raised me to basically say like, hey, you get a job, you stay there. And that was just sort of my inclination. And I actually did like my employer. I loved my job. And then, when another offer came along, that's when I started seriously contemplating moving on. But then, I had a lot of other friends who they didn't have that perspective. They were sort of like, okay, what's my next best thing? And it didn't always have to be at the same company. And it really didn't hurt their careers. In fact, they were able to probably get higher salaries because every time they jumped, they saw an increase in their salary usually. And then at the same time, their titles may have changed. So it is a good way to increase salary. It is a good way to possibly go up to the next level. But it is also something that could be detrimental. So if you're not smart about how you move around in a career, so if you're going from like an assistant or to another assistant position to another assistant position, you've just spent 3 years at one level, and your clock basically starts each time before you move into the next one. So you want to make sure that, okay, if you're moving to another position, you're going to get bumped up to maybe director level or something like that. So that way you have some movement and you're not starting from the baseline every time. But it's not as detrimental anymore. It may vary by industry. There may be some industries out there that are a little bit more stuffy, but for most part, millennials, Gen Z, they're going to be moving around a lot more often.
I fall into that bucket, Gen Z, but I'm not going anywhere. I love you too much, Andrew.
Wonderful. Well, we really appreciate you too, Michaela.
Sarah has a question here. Is it common for people to get bumped up a level when they change jobs?
I think it's common. It really depends on experience and also what you feel you're ready for. Because I know some people who have done that where they've moved around a few times, but they've stayed at their current level. And sometimes when I've asked them about it, they'll say, I'm not ready for that next step. And they knew based on their skills, their experience, that was just something that was beyond them. And they moved around maybe to see if they could possibly get more experience in a certain area. So maybe they wanted to work with larger clients. Maybe they wanted to work with smaller clients, more diverse clients or something like that. And, that's why they moved. So it wasn't necessarily to get bumped up. But like I said, you do want to be looking for like, what is that next step? What can I move up to when you're ready? Because otherwise, like if you keep moving on to the same position or same level at another company, they're going to say, well, you've been at that position only for a year. So it's difficult, it's difficult to move you up right now. And, like I said, you just keep starting from the bottom, and then you end up maybe behind people in your age bracket.
Right. And another theme that I've been hearing a lot more, and Sarah shared it, our colleague Sarah, who's leaving, is that maybe there isn't something that's next. Do you have advice for someone who's saying, and of course we have to realize that this is somewhat of a topic that carries some privilege. A lot of people can't just up and quit their jobs, especially when they don't know what's coming next. But if I am in a position, maybe I had 3 months savings, how long should I expect to maybe be looking for work? And if I don't know what I'm doing next, is there any advice that you could give?
So if you can, it's best to stay in your job until you find a new one. And there's a few reasons for that. The first one is that there is sort of inherent bias at employers where they want something that someone else has. If you think about a child who's playing with a toy train, another child will say, I want that train, even if there's another one maybe lying on the floor, is because someone else has it. Right. So inherently people tend to bias toward people who already have jobs. It's not always the case. That's not like a rule that says, you're not going to get a job if you're unemployed. But historically, that is something that you hear, that people like to see people who are currently employed. There is a myth about how LinkedIn works, and I have checked on this. So if you have ever heard from someone that LinkedIn sort of downgrades you in search results because you're not currently employed, that's not true. I've checked that twice. I don't work on products, but I have investigated and asked people about that. So if you hear that rumor, that's not true. Second of all, there are financial security reasons. You don't know exactly when you might land a job. Positions that you've applied for may end up going into hibernation almost. A recruiter might go on vacation for 2 weeks, things like that. So you want to make sure that you are financially secure. So even if you have 3 months savings, you don't know necessarily what's going to happen. And I think this is my personal sort of feeling, is we're still in a time of great change. We have the pandemic in the US, at least, looking like it's under control, but we're about where we were last summer, at least in New York State, when you look at the rates and everything. So, there's another infectious variant that's making its way through the country. So personally, I think people might want to be more conservative when it comes to looking at just sort of quitting their job and only job searching. Job searching is something that you can do, in your evenings or just in your off hours. And the most important thing is to go in with a plan, though. So whether you say you want to take a few months off or whether you say that you want to keep working, have a plan for your job search. Don't just wing it. Don't just start applying to everything. I always like to say that job searching is a holistic thing. So it's not just networking. It's not just applying. You have to do all those things. You have to keep learning. You have to keep connecting with people. So go in with a plan, get a targeted list of employers, have an idea where you want to move to. And, maybe you don't have that and you need to work on that first. So that becomes part of your plan. So just have that plan and say, okay, I'm going to quit or something. But you also have to realize that you're against a time crunch if you do that. But if not, and you continue working, that's probably a little bit more relief. But the most important thing is, don't fall in love with the job until you have it. So keep applying to jobs until you sign an offer letter. A lot of people, they sort of trip at the finish line when they think they're going to get a job and all of a sudden they don't. So that is like the most important thing. Have a plan, keep going, and then, see it through. Don't just sort of, give up at the end.
And you touched on something that I think is quite interesting for me, because I remember when I was looking for a job, I was applying to everything and anything that was open to me and I thought that I'd be interested in. But what you're saying is kind of don't apply to everything. Is there a sweet spot? And why wouldn't I just cast a wide net?
Well, yeah. And I hear from a lot of people, I get a lot of emails from people who say, listen, I've been job searching for 6 months now, or, the one time someone messaged me and I think they said they were job searching for 3 months and they had sent like 100 resumes. So that's like one a day, or one application a day or even more. And that is a lot. So usually you want to focus on quality over quantity. And there are several reasons for that. The first is that the quality of your application will speak volumes, especially if you're going to be dealing with recruiters. These are people who see applications, resumes, and cover letters all day, every day. And they know people who phone it in, and they know people who actually legitimately want to work at their company. So you want to make sure that you're spending time on your application, that you're formatting it toward what that position is. So a good example of that is if software engineers, they have about like 50 terms for what a software engineer could be. It could be a software engineer. It could be some sort of, learning intelligent engineer guide or something like that. One company, so you want to look at what this company is asking for and say, okay, I can highlight this. I could highlight this skill, this keyword, or something like that. So that way it really speaks to the recruiter and the hiring manager on the other side. And that's going to increase your potential at getting a call back automatically. And then also, if you have a targeted list of companies where you say, I want to work here, I want to work at these places for these reasons, it really gives you a mission and a purpose to do it with some intention. So you can start networking with people. You could look at who's in your network. I think a lot of people, they just go into it and say like, hey, I'm going to apply everywhere and just hope for the best. But if you don't do that holistic job search where you're doing all those various things, the chance of success is going to be pretty low. There's a ton of different statistics that gets thrown around about how many calls back people receive per, 100 resumes. I don't know how accurate they are, but it's pretty low if you ask people. And there's probably people who are watching that have had that experience. If you have, let me know. But really, you want to be doing all of those steps combined and have that plan. So that way the odds of success with your job search increase and the time you spent job searching decreases.
And I just want to point out that you're getting a lot of love in the stream. Alita here says, you're helping make this week's episode content more accessible, neat touch from a subject matter expert. Dawn says, good advice, Andrew. As we start wrapping up our time here, because I don't want to run over, Ryan pointed out a question here, and he wanted to know whether or not cover letters are still in robust use. Are people writing those?
I think the smart people are. So here's the thing. Cover letters, it depends on who you talk to, whether they are getting whether they're getting read. If you talk to a recruiter, they'll say, listen, I didn't ask for a cover letter. I don't want a cover letter. I'm not going to read a cover letter. But then there are others who say, hey, if you included a cover letter, I'm going to take a look. So usually what I tell people is if you're going to include a cover letter, make it worth the recruiter's time or the hiring manager's time, because anyone who works on a computer knows that to download documents is sometimes not the easiest thing to do. So you want them to open a cover letter and feel like it was worth the trouble to actually open it. So it doesn't have to be long. In fact, I think the cover letter I submitted to LinkedIn was like 75 words. So it doesn't have to be an essay. It could just be something very short, to the point, and just something to get their attention, and also just go a little bit beyond the resume. And, it very rarely will hurt you to include a cover letter. I assume if you just sort of go off on the person and tell them what you really think of them or something like that, then it'll probably hurt you. But if you include one that's rather benign, it'll be fine. And again, another thing you want to do is just make sure that you are doing it with the intention of working at that particular place. You don't want to just say, see enclosed resume, because who wants to open a document and see that? So I always think it's a good idea. I always like to think about Leonardo da Vinci. So everyone says that Leonardo da Vinci created the resume, but I think they're wrong, because if you actually read this document that Leonardo da Vinci wrote, it's a cover letter. And basically he goes through his experience, but he explains why it's important. And I believe it was like to some Duke in Milan. I forget exactly the specifics, but he goes through why it's important, his experience and everything, and he got the job. So I always like to think of that as like the first cover letter, even though most people call it the first resume. And, it worked for Da Vinci, so it could probably work for you.
Thank you, Andrew. You are the best expert I have ever spoken to on job seeking. If you have more questions, please join Andrew on Fridays. You also have a newsletter in addition to Get Hired, Get Ahead, that I'd love you to shout out before you go. So please tell us a little bit more about that.
Of course. So Get Hired is where we talk about job searching and finding your next play, and Get Ahead is about growing in your career. So when, there are two different things. So Get Ahead just focuses on sort of the career aspect, and Get Hired is telling you how to get hired.
Thank you for joining us for this
conversation. Of course.
conversation.
Thank you, Michaela. I hope to see you soon.
You will.
In person. This is great, but I miss sitting across from you in the office.
In real life, yes.
Right. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me.